I honestly thought the letter was a mistake. I mean, who fines someone thousands of dollars for nothing? At least, that's what I believed until the moment I opened the envelope. When I read the last line, "Failure to comply will result in legal action," my stomach sank, my heart skipped a beat, and I realized immediately that this wasn't a simple clerical error or a misunderstanding. Something deeper was happening, and I could feel it in my bones even before I knew the full story. I live in a suburban neighborhood that most people would call peaceful. Quiet streets, clean lawns, rows of neatly painted houses. It was the kind of place where kids ride their bikes safely and neighbors greet each other on weekends. I had moved here about a year ago, looking for somewhere stable to settle down. After renting apartments all over the city, I wanted a house I could truly call mine, a little slice of security in an otherwise chaotic world. The idea of buying a home seemed like the ultimate adult accomplishment, the kind of milestone everyone tells you will give you a sense of pride and control over your life. And for the first year, it did. Everything seemed perfect. The HOA, Homeowners Association, was part of the neighborhood structure, and they had a reputation for being strict. They sent newsletters reminding residents of yard maintenance rules, seasonal regulations, and other community standards that were designed to maintain property values and the neighborhood aesthetic. I had read their handbook thoroughly before moving in. I wanted to follow all the rules, to be that perfect resident, the kind that no one could ever complain about. I mowed my lawn on schedule, trimmed my hedges regularly, painted my fences in the approved colors, and never made any alterations without written approval. I thought that by staying obedient and low profile, I would avoid the kind of conflict that other residents often whispered about at community events. For months, life was calm. My daily routine was simple but satisfying. Morning coffee, walking to the nearby park, occasional neighborhood jogging, and evenings spent watching TV or reading. I rarely interacted with the HOA directly because there was no need. They sent the occasional letter or reminder, and I obeyed. My neighbors were mostly cordial, waving hello and keeping to themselves, which suited me perfectly. I had no interest in disputes or drama. I just wanted a home and some peace. Then, on a bright Tuesday afternoon, I checked my mailbox and noticed an official envelope. The logo of the HOA was stamped clearly on the front. My heart sank slightly. Official letters were usually mundane, but something about the stiffness of the envelope made me uneasy. I tore it open carefully, expecting another reminder or perhaps a notification about dues. Instead, I found a letter demanding that I pay a fine of $1,200. I read the reason once, twice, 3 times. Unauthorized exterior modification. I froze. I hadn't made any modifications. I hadn't painted anything new, built anything, or even moved a single object outside. Nothing had changed since I moved in. My mind raced to find an explanation. Was it a typo? Had someone submitted a false report? I reread the letter carefully, looking for any detail that could explain it. Nothing. First I laughed. A nervous laugh, tinged with disbelief. Surely this was some kind of mistake. Maybe they mixed up my address with someone else's. That made sense, at least on the surface. But then, as I looked closer, I noticed the date. The fine was already overdue. I had exactly 5 days to pay it, or the consequences would escalate. My hands started to tremble slightly, and I could feel a cold knot forming in my stomach. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Mistakes happen. I would call the office, clarify everything, and it would be resolved. But deep down, I felt an uneasy weight, a gnawing feeling that this was going to be more complicated than it appeared. I picked up my phone and dialed the HOA office. The line rang several times and then went straight to voicemail. I left a polite message, explaining the situation and requesting clarification. I hung up, feeling the tension in my chest. 2 days later, another letter arrived. My jaw dropped. The fine had now doubled to $2,500. The letter warned that continued non-payment could result in legal action. My earlier hope that this was a mistake was evaporating fast. The reality began to sink in. I was facing an aggressive organization that, for reasons unknown, had chosen me as their target. I spent the next hour pacing back and forth in my living room. I reread every HOA document I had received over the past year. I checked my records, my photos, my emails. I had done nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing. And yet here I was, facing a fine that I could not afford to ignore. My mind went over every possible explanation. Could it be a complaint from a neighbor? Was someone trying to get back at me for a minor disagreement? My mind raced through the events of the past year, trying to identify any incident that could have triggered this. There was nothing significant. No fights, no arguments, no violations on my part. I decided that I needed to document everything. I printed copies of all letters I had received, pulled up old emails, and started making notes of every relevant interaction. I wanted to create a complete paper trail in case this escalated further. It was my first instinct to protect myself, to be prepared. But even as I organized my documents, I felt a mix of anxiety and anger building up. How could an organization designed to help the community act in such an arbitrary and punitive way? That evening, I sat down with a cup of coffee, staring at the fine. I remembered the neighborhood children playing outside earlier, the quiet street, the smiling neighbors who probably had no idea what I was facing. I realized that for all appearances of calm and normalcy, beneath the surface, small power struggles and hidden resentments could simmer for months, even years. And somehow I had become their target. I decided I needed to plan my next step carefully. Paying the fine blindly was not an option. I couldn't let fear or exhaustion dictate my actions. I needed a strategy, a clear record, and possibly advice from someone familiar with HOA regulations. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could become a test of patience, persistence, and observation. Every letter, every interaction, every small detail could be used to either defend myself or expose arbitrary enforcement. The following morning, I went outside to take photographs of my property. Every angle, every section of the driveway, the lawn, the fence, everything had to be documented. I created a timeline of my interactions with the HOA, listing every correspondence, every minor approval I had received in the past year, and every maintenance action I had performed. I wanted to be ready for any escalation. Even at this stage, I found moments to reflect on the absurdity of it all. I had been fined for a stain that had been there since I moved in. The thought that such a trivial matter could cause months of stress was almost surreal. And yet, it was happening. My mind could not escape the looming possibility of legal proceedings. The anxiety gnawed at me, yet beneath it, a strange determination began to grow. I was not going to let this slide, not without fighting. I also realized that community politics could be complicated. Someone must have had influence over the HOA board, someone who could sway decisions or push personal grudges. I began recalling past interactions with neighbors. I remembered a minor disagreement I had months earlier with my next-door neighbor over parking. I had barely thought of it since then, but suddenly, it took on new significance. Could this neighbor have used their position to initiate this fine? The thought made my jaw tighten. Over the next couple of days, I carefully monitored the mailbox and my email. Every piece of communication from the HOA, no matter how minor, was scrutinized. I was alert to every letter, every change in tone, every vague reference to rules or violations. My stress level remained high, but at the same time, I felt a strange focus sharpening inside me. I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator, documenting, planning, and preparing for what might come next. By the end of the week, the tension in my home was palpable. The fine was looming over my head like a shadow, but I had also built a foundation of preparation. I felt both anxious and strangely empowered. I knew that my next actions would determine whether this would spiral into a prolonged conflict or whether I could reclaim control over my life. I sat by the window that evening, looking out at the quiet suburban street. The golden sunlight glinted off the neatly painted houses, the perfectly trimmed lawns, and the children playing safely in the distance. Everything looked peaceful, almost idyllic. And yet, inside my home, a storm of bureaucracy, frustration, and tension had taken hold. I sipped my coffee slowly, knowing that the next steps I took would define the weeks, and perhaps months, ahead. I was ready to fight, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. I could not allow myself to be bullied or silenced over something so trivial, yet consequential. And with that resolve, I began drafting my first formal communication to the HOA, detailing my position, my records, and my expectation that this fine be reviewed and rescinded. Even as I wrote, I could feel the weight of anticipation. What would they say? Would they respond? Would they dismiss my letters? The uncertainty was immense, yet it also fueled a careful, meticulous planning process. Every word mattered. Every fact mattered. Every action was now part of a strategy. I knew that this was only the beginning. The storm was brewing, and I had taken my first step into the fray.